James, I'm not sure if you want to say a few words. I have some words of introduction to say.
I think, Eric, I'll leave it to you. You set this up beautifully, and please do introduce Kitty.
Okay, I'm going to switch my camera on briefly just while I do that. And I will say a few words. So thanks everyone for coming along. I'm absolutely thrilled to invite today's speaker, Kitty Maryatt, who is joining us today from California. I think it's probably about 10:30 in the morning with you, Kitty.
Yes.
And so Kitty was for some 30 years the director of Scripps College Press. And over that time, she, with her students, made and published some 60 hand typeset, letterpress printed, hand-bound books. And Kitty has also published and bound a number of her own artist books. Maybe we'll get the chance to hear about some of those later, Kitty. But she has also collaborated. She's worked with a number of different binders, fine binders over the years in the US and in Europe. I think we will possibly hear a bit about some of your European collaborations. Kitty's books are in the collections of prestigious institutions, including Chicago's Newberry Library, Stanford University, UCLA, the Getty Research Institute, and Harvard University. She did retire in 2016, but I'm going to put retired in quotation marks because since then, Kitty has been working full time, and I've got a strong sense of what full time means here, on the recreation of La Prose du Transsibérien, which is, as we will be seeing, a remarkable artist's book. And in fact, it is Kitty's recreation of the Prose du Transsibérien that allowed me to get to know her and her extraordinary work. Kitty is a veritable dynamo and very much in demand, so we're extremely lucky to have her with us today to present this talk and hopefully demonstration of the Pochoir technique. And the title of Kitty's talk is Nearly Extinct Traditional French Pochoir Techniques. So on our collective behalf, Kitty, let me extend a very warm welcome to you, and I will hand straight over to you. So we look forward very much to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, although I would actually like to be in England. It's so wonderful to be there. What I'm going to do is start out with La Prose du Transsibérien and show you my facsimile, which I call a recreation. So I'll just show you how it might have been originally. I'll just talk about that, and then I'll show you my recreation. And my husband, Gary Lindgren, will help me open it. So the book actually is like this. It's painted by Sonia. Oh, interesting. It's painted by Sonia Delaunay originally on vellum. I'll make sure that I can see it. And so here's the vellum cover that she did in oils. I decided not to do my recreation in oils because it takes so long for them to dry. And because there are 16 different colors, it would, you'd have to work to not get your hand in the oils, and making 180 of these as opposed to the limited number that Sonia Delaunay did, I just knew I had to change to acrylics. So the cover that she did didn't have the two folds as mine has, two folds that goes around the book. She just had one fold on here, but that's because I have this extra little booklet that's kind of a long colophon that explains about the project and why I'm doing this project and who helped me with the project. So basically the cover with Sonia Delaunay and Blaise Cendrars, I should say, their original 1913 book was glued, don't know if I can show it here, was glued to the cover with that little tab right there. So the cover did not detach from the book, but mine detaches so that you can hang it up as Sonia might have wanted you to do, because I really call it a book painting. When you try to open this book and look at it, you're in trouble because you can't see anything. So where's the book? But if you now have your very special person to help you, don't open it yet. Just walk back a little tiny bit. This is 6.5 feet long. And now tilt it a little bit so that it's vertical. No, Gary, down. So now can you see the book in its entirety? But it's really awkward because nobody can read it quite like this. So my husband's going to walk over here to the stairs so that you can see the whole thing. I hope, if it's still in view. So there's the whole thing. And so how do you read that? Well, the best thing is to lay it across your sofa, or if you have a 6.5 foot long table, you put it on the table. But they wanted you not to see the text and the imagery separately. They were imposing simultaneity on you. They wanted you to see the text and the imagery immediately together, never separately. So I'm going to close this up again. So it's basically an accordion fold after you've folded it in half. It's kind of interesting because there are 21 different folds. It doesn't make it easy to fold. You have to have a jig. If it were in half and then in half again, and the powers of 2, then that would be easy to fold. But because it's 21 folds, you need a jig. But that's what they decided to do back in 1913. Why the heck did they do that? And that was why I started my project in the first place. Firstly, they didn't finish the edition, which they hoped to be 150 copies, and they only did about 80 copies. I've been doing a census trying to find where they are, at least the existence of them. And I have a blog where you can go look on my blog and get some information about this project in 1913, and also my project and why I'm doing it. So this is very awkward, but they really wanted it to be an avant-garde book. No other book in 1913 was like this. Not only was the structure avant-garde, the painting was almost entirely abstract. Abstraction in painting had just come into being with Robert and Delaunay, her husband, and Sonia right at the forefront with Kandinsky and several other people making abstract paintings. And also Blaise Cendrars was writing in a format that wasn't usual for that time. It was in free verse and this kind of story-like thing that repeated and repeated as if you were going on a train, and it would make little diversions into one place and to another. So it's called La Prose du Transsibérien because he was captivated in back in 1900, when Blaise went to the Paris World's Fair. He was able to see the exhibit called the La Prose du Transsibérien. It was called the Trans-Siberian Railroad exhibit, with actual railroad cars there, and with this screen going across the windows like a movie. He got captivated by cinema and movies. Anyway, Eric can tell you a lot more about Blaise Cendrars, but I won't go on and on. But this is, it captivated me, this particular book. And also, I should mention, too, that Blaise at that 1900, he was only 13 years old when he saw this choo-choo train. He saw this cinema, these rolls of images that would roll past a window. And they had one that was on a display device where someone could roll it and you'd have kind of a fake cinema, the beginnings of cinema. Anyway, at age 13, he was quite taken by these ideas, and they all ended up in this book. It's truly amazing to me. You know, when you're so young, you get so captivated by a certain idea or set of ideas that it sort of colors your whole life, and that happens to so many young people that they remember things from their youth. Same thing with Sonia Delaunay. She was born in Ukraine and was adopted by her aunt and uncle when she was about 5 or 6 years old, and went to live in St. Petersburg, and she got a wonderful education, including a literary and artistic education. So she appreciated poetry and novels and so on, but she also was very interested in art, and she got a chance to go study in Germany. And then she ended up in Paris, just like Blaise did. So Blaise was Swiss, she was Russian, she was Ukrainian. And so there they are, finally meeting each other, sort of facilitated by Apollinaire. And they decided, oh boy, let's make a book together. We have the same kinds of thoughts. And Blaise was captivated by the ideas of the simultaneity also, and wanted to get this simultaneity idea with image and word also. So, so that's the project that I decided to attack. And I didn't realize when I first saw this book at the Getty Museum in 1988, I think I saw it. And I didn't realize that it was pochoir, or stenciling, because I know stencil. Everybody knows what stencils are like. There are a million different ways of doing stencil, but I thought this couldn't possibly be stenciling. It's so fresh. It just looks like she just painted it yesterday. And did she just paint it? How many did they do? And so on. So that's when I started learning about pochoir, although I had taken a class in pochoir just the year before. In any case, this book just sort of lingered in the background while I was teaching for all those years. And then finally, when I had a chance to have some time after I retired, actually, before I retired, I guess I got a faculty grant. I got a chance to go to France and study with what I thought was the last remaining commercial pochoir firm, Atelier Coloriste, in Ploux-Baslenac, France, and realized that the only people in the whole wide world who really knew how the book was done in 1913 was Nathalie Couderc and Christine Menguy. So anyway, that started my long idea that they should do the pochoir for a new edition, facsimile edition. But one thing I wanted to show you before I go to show you what pochoir is like and tell you any more little fun stories, is I just want to show you my deluxe version. So my husband will bring over this big book that I've been doing. So once I started doing this regular version, I just thought, well, you know, now that I have a book that is ready for binders, I can do all the bindings, which I always intended to do because I'm a binder. But then I thought that I could have other binders bind the book. So I had 24 other binders bind copies of this book, and we put on an exhibit that went to 5 places, including London at Meg's. And anyway, I did my own binding also. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. So this became, it's a little bit big, the deluxe edition. So instead of folding up the book as the regular edition is done, I folded it differently, and I told the 24 different binders, I'm including me as the 25th, the 24 different binders, that they could fold it differently. So you can see that the proportions of this book are a little bit different. So that's just the clamshell holding my binding. So this is aluminum. I've done about 25 of the deluxe, and I'm going to do about some more. I don't know how many more. And so this has the swirlies like you do in pochoir and the stenciling technique that I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes. And these colors are the same as the colors and acrylics as the vellum cover that you just saw a few minutes ago. And I had the aluminum routed out, and then I cut all of the hinges, and then the inside. So this went in the Drop Dead Gorgeous exhibit. And then the book is on the inside here. And the advantage of this book now is that I can remove it. And now I can sit at my leisure and I can look at this book like this. And you still get the simultaneity of seeing the image and the text at the same time. And you can see every page, and you can linger, and you don't need to have a partner to have you hold this book. So that was the idea of changing the folding. And I was inspired by Paul Bonnet, who did the only binding that I've been able to find of the original. So Paul Bonnet changed the scheme of folding. And I should say that I have this second part in the deluxe copy, which will include a number of other things. Really, it's basically the story of this project. How do you make a facsimile of something that's so remarkably hard to understand? It's got 66 different colors. I had to research all of that, and 94 different pochoir plates that I had to cut. And then I have these things called Sonia's visual vocabulary and the color charts, which help me figure out the colors. I've got the type identified. There are 30 different typefaces. So in there, you'll find the type identification. I've got extra new aluminum pochoir plates so that you can practice doing your own. And then I've got what are called the progressives, which show you step by step how you actually develop the many different colors on any one page. So I won't show you any of that now. I'm just giving you an idea that I've kind of gotten into it, you know. But also I wanted those who have an original, you know, museums and collectors who have an original might find this research really helpful. And so that's my copy that my husband, you can take the whole table, that my husband's going to take away. Okay, so that gives you just a quick overview of this project, which I actually started in about 2012 when I went to the Getty Museum with all of my tracings of the original. So if I hadn't had, excuse me for getting so close, but if I hadn't had this book, this is a facsimile in 2008 of the La Prose du Transsibérien, but it's 100%. All of the other facsimiles in existence are by law a different size, and in France and in Spain, and there are many different facsimiles. Anyway, Yale decided to do a facsimile of their book, and so here's their book. What's different about theirs is that now you can see the imagery separate from the text, because on the other side is the text. And someone long time before Yale actually got their Okay, so here I am again. Can you still see me?
Yes.
Okay, so I was just talking about the Yale facsimile, which is really, really important. I could not have done the project without this because I needed to be able to trace the original imagery and in order to be able to cut the plates. So if I hadn't had this, it wouldn't have worked. I couldn't do it because nobody would let me trace their precious $500,000 copy, you see. Anyway, so I took this Yale facsimile and that I had bought, and I started tracing the images, but I eventually went to Yale to discuss the fact that it was folded differently from all of the other ones that I had seen. And they just said it came to me that way. So they got it already folded that way. So it was lucky for me, but it does give the wrong idea of how all the rest of them are folded. So I'm trying to find this one. So luckily, Timothy Young, who's the one who did the facsimile from Yale, gave me this copy, which is basically the scroll copy. And therefore, I didn't have to contend with any folds in the paper. So again, this is 6.5 feet. So you just make sure that you have a table that's 6.5 feet long, and you'll do the tracings of the parts. I'll show you a tracing. I'm sure you're not going to be able to see this very well, but I'll try to get it close up. Let's see. Can you see anything at all?
Yes.
That's the tracing of a shape. Sorry, I can't quite tell if you can see anything. When I pull back, you might not be able to see anything, but I've got registration marks on the sides, and I'm going to do a demonstration of how to do all of this in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do next is to ask Eric if he would show a little, like a 1.5-minute video, quickie overview of what Pochoir looks like. And then I'm going to show you a PowerPoint to show you many more examples of Pochoir, so that you get a feeling of what this stenciling, how this French traditional stenciling is different from spraying numbers on your curb or a graffiti through, a cardboard stencil plate. So Eric, if you would please put up that little video. So MCBA had me do a talk and a workshop and all kinds of things.
Okay, I'm just going to play that. Oh, just bear with me. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop sharing because I need to make the sound. I need to switch on the sound. So just do bear with me for a second. Sorry, I'm nearly there. Yeah, there we are. Okay. Right. There we are. Okay, here we go. Okay. I hope it's not too glitchy. I'm just going to start playing this now. Sorry, can you see that or not? Okay, no. Let me just try one more time. I think I may have yeah, just bear with me. Nearly there. Okay, got the sound, got this shared screen. It should hopefully work this time. The buttons weren't behaving properly on my MacBook. Okay, here we go. Oops, sorry about that. Let me just stop that. Okay, I will stop sharing.
So now we can go right into the PowerPoint?
Yep, okay, just bear with me. I will share my screen again, actually, and do it that way. Okay, just bear with me. Is that clear to everyone?
Yes.
Good. Whenever you're ready, Kitty.
Okay. So I decided that I'd better put together a number of prints that were done by Pochoir so that you could see the range of techniques that would be used to replicate a work of art. And that's really the main reason for Pochoir, that even before Pochoir became very popular in Paris in the 1900s, they used to make lithographs of paintings that someone had done. So it was already common to be able to, you could only sell one painting, but you could make multiples of, say, a painting or some kind of lithographic facsimile. In any case, Pochoir was used in that way to replicate paintings like Kandinsky paintings or Matisse and so on. So I'm just going to show you a few of those and then tell you why I think that Pochoir has become nearly extinct. Next. So before Pochoir, actually, let me put it this way. Pochoir is the French word for stencil, and stencils, as I've just said, can be done in many different ways. When we say Pochoir and you look it up on the web, you will find all kinds of techniques with plastic, with cardboard, with katagami for Japanese stenciling, and so on. So I usually refer to this as traditional French Pochoir. So here's a French fashion plate. By the way, is that recording and transcription thing in the middle of your screen too, or is it just in my screen? In any case, it doesn't matter. So this fashion plate was done in 1866. It's a collotype print, which is how most of the Pochoir prints were done, because remember that the reason that you use the Pochoir technique, which we'll call a printing technique, is that you want to make multiples of some original artwork. You usually don't just make up something and then make multiples. You're usually copying something to sell them, at least back in the early, well, in fact, most of the time that Pochoir was being done, either in books or prints. So the reason I mentioned collotype is that that's a particular kind of printing, different from lithography or offset printing, that used a gelatin plate. And the advantage of collotype printing was that it gave you grays. And this one, you can see, has only part of it being, let me get rid of that, only part of it has been painted. Next. So we'll have a close-up on this next slide, which shows you maybe at the bottom of her shawl, the right-hand side, do you see that little red part that's sticking out? So I looked at this very carefully at the original to see whether or not it was hand-painted or used stencils. And I think because of that and several other little places, that it was just freely hand-painted, which was totally common. Medieval books were freely hand-painted, and therefore, so was this one. Next. But if you want to make a whole lot of copies, let's say doing 1,200 of them or something, or even if you have a whole lot of colors, like in these beautiful Pochoirs by Segui, then Pochoir was the way to go. And it was developed particularly starting with André Marty before about 1896, I think, is some of the early Pochoir plates that he did for wallpapers. Jean Saudet was his apprentice. Segui came a little bit later to Pochoir, but Segui was the artist who also did the Pochoir for these plates. And you can see that we have many, many colors. This was done for wallpaper, for design. So wallpaper designs, furniture designs, next, were done in the early times for Pochoir. And a number of workshops developed. Daniel Jacomet was one of the biggest. All of these workshops were in Paris or nearby. And here is his the ladies who worked for him, and some men. Usually there was a master Pochoir cutter, the stencil cutter, and there was a master colorist who would do the color separations and mix the paints. And then you'd have your worker bees who would do the actual replications of the colors by plate. So they'd usually, if they were going to do an edition of 150, they'd have a pile of 150 pieces of paper. They'd have one plate. They'd have their jar of paint to the right and a brush, a Pochoir brush that had long hog bristles, and they'd swirl it around in a little bowl or plate. and then swirl it on the stencil, and then flip the stencil to the left, move the paper to another pile on the right, and go back to the pile of 150, which is now 149, and put the stencil plate on top just by hand, and do the next stenciling, pull it, and completely, do that over and over again 150 times, or 1200, or whatever the number might be. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that at Jacomet, the color-type printing was done on one floor and the Pochoir on the second floor. Next. And you can see a Pochoir plate on the upper left. This is a Jacomet metal stencil. This was made out of zinc. They also used copper. You can see the copper plate on the right-hand side, Jean Saudet stencil. He did this particular stencil, Jean Saudet, who did the only book on techniques of Pochoir with a lot of examples. In the deluxe edition of the Jean Saudet 1925 book, he included this particular beautiful copper plate in all of the deluxe editions. He did 60 deluxe editions and 500 regular editions. Now imagine doing 60 of these, cutting these little plates. I'll show you the cutting a little bit more extensively later. Next. And so how would this work? So basically you take an original work of art. This particular piece was done by Georges Lepape, a sketch for a fashion plate in 1912. Fashion plates became really, had been useful, as you saw in that fashion plate from 1866. It was always to show the women in various magazines and so on, how the newest fashions would be presented. And so the artist would do a sketch like this, next, and then it would be translated into Pochoir by the pocheurs. And this particular print was done several years later in 1920. But notice how it was a little bit different. Things change for one reason or another, but it becomes something that could be replicated as opposed to painting 120 of these. Next. And so again, this shows that furnishings were also done by Pochoir. This was in a magazine called Gazette du Bon Ton in 1920, and the title was The Far End of the Boudoir. Imagine a boudoir like that. Next. And Diaghilev was taking his ballet company around, and Leon Basque was one of the fellows the big artist who did a lot of the fashions for his ballet. And later on, portfolios of his designs were replicated in Pochoir. Next. And I don't even know who did this one, but I found this on the net and I just thought it was so fabulous, with the replication of speed done by stenciling. It's totally amazing. Next. So that was done in 1913. Also in 1913 is my dear book, La Prose du Transsibérien. And it was done by Sonia Delaunay, painting an original oil painting on the left, and then Blaise Cendrars writing a 445-line poem on the right. And then they had to figure out how they were going to put those two together. And that's when they met in 1913. In January of 1913, they decided to make a book together. But Blaise hadn't finished his poem, so she had to wait until he finished his poem. Then he had to take it to the typographer and start setting the type so that they would know how long her painting would be. But wait, how did they get this particular shape that was different from a codex? I mean, Blaise had already published 2 books that were in codex form with normal type, not 30 different typefaces like he did on this. So, I mean, all of those kinds of things intrigued me. Besides the beauty of the book, I thought, why did they not finish this book? Why is it in this shape? And so I have many different reasons why I think it was in this shape. Of course, this is a trip, theoretically, on the Trans-Siberian Railroad train. That's what the poem says that it is. And yet there are stops and starts, and so there's a lot of movement. But why couldn't they just have done this as a regular codex? So think about the maps. So there was a Paris map that I actually found that is exactly this shape. So they could have seen that Paris map and decided to fold it like a map. But I think that the stronger case was that when he was at the typographers at Imprimerie Créteil in just outside Paris, well, I guess it was in Paris, that he saw the, hundreds of type cases and the monotype machines, and he was able to get galley proofs of the types that were being set for him. And the galleys were on long sheets of paper. And I have pictures in another lecture someday, if you'd like to hear that, that the galley proofs were long, narrow things. And normally when you get your galley proofs for books, you would separate let's say the first 22 lines from the galley would go on page 1, and the next 22 would go on page 2. And that's how you would start making up the makeup for each page in a codex form. So I think when he got that, which was many, many months later, that he might have thought, oh my gosh, I don't have to divide up my poem. You can see it on one long page instead of being broken up into codex form. So I think that's more likely how it happened, because when you see that Paris map, you have no idea where you would actually place things. So Sonia was waiting all of this long time to paint her painting. She couldn't do anything until the type was set. So this is the facsimile that I just showed you a few minutes ago from the Beinecke Library. They printed 2,000 copies, and I was lucky to get one. Next. And so I took my facsimile to the Getty Museum and Yale University, to the Beinecke, and I made a whole lot of swatches of colors so that I could try to pin down what colors were done in the originals, because the Yale facsimile is an offset version of it, and it's not quite true colors. So I would take this to the Getty. I went to about 10 or so 15 different museums and collectors, and took my color swatches with me until I finally got the colors that I thought would actually match most of the examples that I showed. And so again, that was the start of my research at the Getty in 2012, although I had been researching for some time before that. Next. And so this just shows a close-up of some of the tracing. So this is one of the first tracings I did of the Yale facsimile, where I simply traced the shapes and I tried to indicate a color. So just basic colors like blue and red and so on. So that's how you actually start replicating a work of art, is that you have to do a tracing so that you can figure out what colors, how many colors you need, and basically doing color separations. Next. And so I luckily found through Zwartkruis, a Dutch website fellow who gave me the website of Atelier Coloris in 2014. I think I found that. And I thought, oh, they would be awfully nice to talk to, because I saw on their website that they had zinc plates and that they were doing it the traditional way. And it turns out that they worked for Jacomet from 85 to 91 or 75 to 81. Sorry, I can't remember. I think it was 75 to 81. So they knew Jacomet techniques. So on the left is Nathalie Couderc, and on the right is Christine Mengy. And so after we did this, I did a little facsimile of just the upper left-hand side of the long 6.5-foot book. And once I met them, I thought, oh, they'd be the perfect people to do a new facsimile. Next. And so why do we study La Prose in the first place? I just wanted to try to make a list of the things that are important about La Prose, which I think I've already said some of them, but I'm just going to reinforce that. So first, the first thing that caught me about this book, of course, is that it's visually stunning. It's got that swirling movement of Sonia Delaunay and the vibrancy of the color. Now, they were at the forefront of French literary arts and the art scene, both literary and art scene, in 1913. So their decision to self-publish was daring, because they would have to shoulder all the costs and the distribution of the book, as opposed to having Vollard or Thériault or so on, if they existed yet, to publish the book. And so Sonia and her husband, Robert, were early explorers of abstraction in painting. And so here's the avant-gardeness of both of them. And Blaise was experimenting with his prose poetry and free verse. He even selected 30 different typefaces in 4 colors for the exposition of his long poem. Now, I did read that Sonia was the one who insisted that the type had to be printed in colors because of her colorful left-hand side. But when he got the galleys, of course, it was in black. They espoused the simultaneity of word and image, extending Sonia and Robert's fascination with simultaneity of color contrasts. So that's in painting. And I could go on more about that, but you can read about that later. And the inventive book structure reflected that need for simultaneous viewing of word and image. Once I realized that Natalie and Christine were perhaps the only commercial pochoirs left who knew the traditional techniques using metal stencils, I thought that they should produce a new facsimile with original pochoir. Next. So I'm going to show you a few of the Atelier Coloris prints next, and some details from them. And so we're going to talk about the original collotype first print, base print, I'll call it, or just doing it directly like this one. So this was a Henri Matisse that they did for a museum. The original was done in 1952, and they were given permission by the Matisse Foundation to produce these for the museum. And so next, you'll see the details when we do a close-up of it. So you can see that here that was intentional overlapping. Matisse originally did this artwork with cut paper because it was near the end of his life and he was having hard times with his body. Next, and another close-up of this, just so that you can see that the telltale signs that it's a pochoir or a stencil print. You see those little burbles on the vertical line. That tells you that it's pochoir. And also maybe there are some over on the upper left-hand corner, and on the far left-hand corner, you see where the brush didn't quite get to the edge. Next. But this one, yes, this one has the same thing. It doesn't have a base print. All of these are original pochoir plates. And this was, the original was done in 1917, and they were hired to print this, and you can count just like in the Matisse one, there was only one color. Here, this one has 10 colors. And next. And just to show you a close-up of the corner, when you have two plates that are done separately at two different times, that you get an overlap which shows. So that's another way to tell that it's pochoir. Next. And this one is an original from Toulouse-Lautrec, and it was done in 1889. It's physically now at the Musée d'Orsay, called La Toilette. So if you look at the hair, you look at the kind of the basket chair on the right-hand side, particularly look at her back. Next. And this was translated into pochoir by Atelier Coloris. It required 36 different plates to do all of those details. Quite amazing. Next. And here's some close-ups that you're going to see of the this print. Look at the back. So how many colors are there, you know, of the 36 different plates? So we can see kind of a gray, kind of a pinkish, a yellow, and let's see, I think that's and a darker yellow. So when you have tints, you still have to count that as another pochoir plate required. Next. And you can see that they had a lot of different colors in the hair to try to replicate that bright red hair that she had. All of those are separate plates. Just count the colors. That'll give you the number of plates. Next. Now, this one, I think, well, maybe not. This one, they lived in Paris when they were working for Jacomet, but they both had been born in Brittany. So they both moved back to Brittany after they left. Well, they closed down Jacomet. And I just love this print that they did because look how watercolory it is. And I'm going to give you some, this one required 14 colors, and I've got some close-ups so you can kind of marvel at the technique. Next. And so you can see in that middle shape there how you've got layers. So when you put layers of color on top of each other, it changes because it's watercolor or gouache. It changes to a new color when you've got overlapping, and pochoir takes advantage of that a lot. And again, you can see kind of the telltale fact that it's pochoir on the shape just to the right of the middle shape down below the right-hand edge of that, this sort of darker blue. You can see the little things called what I call spurs, just to give a name to it. You can see that that's pochoir. Next. But how were these things done? So when it kind of blends off like that in the upper or the middle left-hand corner, do you see how that shape kind of shades off? Well, they would take little cotton pads and maybe soften the edges so that it wasn't such a hard edge. But go to the next plate. Oh, sorry, go back. Excuse me, Eric. Do you mind going back? I just wanted to say, no, it's not this one. Okay, next, please. This is the one that I wanted to talk about. This is again Maheu is a man who lives in Brittany, very famous in Brittany, and they were hired to reproduce his original painting. And again, when you look at this, it's kind of hard to believe that that's done with stencils. And again, when you look at the details, which I'm going to show you in a second, you'll kind of remark like, did this have a collotype plate to start with? So next. So look at those brushy strokes. In fact, it even looks like, you know, the thick paint that he would have used. So, and especially the bottom right-hand side, right at the very bottom, you see how all of those strokes just kind of go off like a real brush. So, and next, maybe there's one more, I can't remember. Yeah, look at that one. So how could that bottom stroke be done with a stencil? You can hardly cut all those little tiny lines and make it go off into, you know, brushland in Pochoir. So I think possibly that sort of medium green and blue was printed first, and then all the Pochoir put on top of that. Next. So here's some more Pochoir prints. So those ones that I just showed you were done by Atelier Coloris. Next, now we're going to see a number of Pochoir prints. This one is from 1912, Gazette du Bon Temps, and this one absolutely has a key line. So it's got 16 different colors on this image, and this is one of many images in a whole magazine. So imagine this magazine done in 500 magazines, and this one has 16 colors. It always just blows my mind every time I look at this and the whole magazine. Next. The paper is really unusual, but here you could kind of distinguish maybe between the original plate and that was printed and the Pochoir. So in the background, we have kind of a red and pink. That's all Pochoir. But on the right-hand side, you kind of see some grapes and things. And you see a circle around the yellow. Maybe in the next slide, I have a detail of that. If I don't, okay, but here you can see the Pochoir strokes, the actual brush strokes, which was intentional. Maybe the next one, I have a close-up of the grapes. Oh, sorry, go back to, sorry, Eric, because I have to talk about those grapes. So one thing you can't do in stencil is cut a circle and keep a concentric circle inside there, like the grapes on the right-hand side with the blue outside and the yellow inside. Therefore, either they had to do two different plates to get the inside and the outside, or they had to do a print. So that blue edging on everything, I think, was printed first at a collotype print. Again, Jacomet and many, Amerti, he had collotype machines also, and so on. So next. And we saw that. Thank you. Next. And here's Man Ray. I love this one. He did a portfolio in 1926. And he originally did collages in 1916 and 17, and then this portfolio reproduced those original collages. And I want you to notice all those little tendrils at the very end. That kind of thing is really hard to do by Pochoir. Next. And this is a set of some of the images that were in this portfolio. And you can see some other really, really tiny, narrow lines in there. And those would all have to have been printed first. What's amazing about the one with the little tendrils is that it was 4 different colors. Therefore, it had to be printed through the press 4 different times, just like La Prose was. There were 4 different colors and there were 4 pages, and therefore there were 16 press runs just to print the type, the 30 different typefaces on the original. Next. And just to show you again, the different techniques, you know, doing an abstraction in 1929 by Laurence, Next. And a Matisse painting, replicated in Pochoir in 1929. Next. And then the famous Matisse's Jazz in 1949, a whole book where he hand wrote lithographically, hand wrote all of the text, and all of the rest was done in Pochoir. He had done his original cut papers with paper that was painted in gouache so that it could have the real color to pin up on the wall, and then it was replicated in Pochoir using gouache, Linel gouache. Next. And one of my favorite books in the whole wide world is Cortège by Pierre Lecuir, is the author, and Lanscoy is the painter. And he also did paper collages first, and then it was printed as a book with huge type by Beaufumet in 1959. Next. And here's a double page spread from this book, totally amazing. I hope you can see the little lines on the blue circle on the left. So on the near the top, there's an almost vertical line, and just below the blue to orange, there's another little line. And from the orange to the right-hand side, there's a line. And from the orange to the left-hand side, there's a line. So there are 4 lines there. And that's because you can't do a Pochoir plate that's too big. This book is huge. And so they just had to divide up large areas of print with different Pochoir plates. And even notice that the black background is done with a gray background in some parts too. Next. And this one is one of my favorites too, that it's so simple, and yet that was done by Pochoir in 1959. We're getting to the end of the heyday of Pochoir. Next. So this one is one that I recently acquired. It was done by Miro as a lithograph, I'm convinced, in somewhere before 1959, because in 1959, the Pierre Matisse Gallery, which is now called Luxembourg Gallery in Paris, decided, no, is it in Paris? In London? Oh, where was I? Paris, must be Paris. He decided to replicate 5 different works that Miro had done, and did this one in Pochoir, and it's totally amazing. Can you believe that that's Pochoir? So next. So, and one more favorite by Miro, just his palette. Also done an edition of 1,200. Count the number of plates required and the time required and all of the work. Next. And finally, I haven't been able to find very many practitioners of Pochoir, of traditional French Pochoir in France anymore, because Atelier Coloris is now closed because Natalie had health issues and they couldn't actually do the Pochoir, which is why I'm doing the Pochoir for my recreation. And but Christine Mengy was able, I paid her to supervise me. So I went over there and did the first 50 copies there under their supervision, just to make sure that I was doing, if I had any questions, I could have support. But this one, he does these wonderful medieval kind of constructions, Jean-Paul Martin. He still has a website in Paris, and you can just look up Atelier du Lys and find him. Next. So this should be the last slide. And so just to kind of reiterate why Pochoir is nearly extinct, but Pochoir is a printing process using stencils for making multiples, particularly to reproduce an original work of art. In the early 1900s, machine printing processes could not faithfully replicate the potentially dozens of colors in a Kandinsky or Monet painting. The technique was also useful for portfolios of designs for wallpaper, textiles, furniture arrangements, as well as artwork. Because the collotype process, also called phototypie, for printing base prints was tricky using gelatin, the Pochoir plates were cut by hand and the watercolor or gouache was applied by hand. All of those reasons made it a costly process, but it still survived until contemporary printing processes caught up and were able to better replicate works of art. But now, with the rise of book art, contemporary book artists can now use the techniques to create new, vibrant work. And that's my reason for doing this project is to make sure that these books get out to places that are teaching book artists. So we can exit this and go to the next phase, which is doing demonstrations.
Thank you very much, Kitty. Just to let you know, I mean, we're getting close to the point where we were going to open things up for some discussion, but I'm sure everyone would be very interested to see the process in action. So maybe if we could, you know, if anyone has questions, maybe they could pop them into the chat while we watch you. How about that? And that way
That's absolutely perfect. And you know what? I don't mind stopping and starting to answer questions. You can see that I can go on and on. So excuse me for taking so long to describe all of that. But now I'm going to show you the processes. And again, Eric, if you see a question that's apropos, just interrupt me when I take a breath, and I'll try to answer it immediately, because usually when I show the demonstrations, there are so many questions. Where do you get the materials? How do you do this? And so Eric's going to put a number of links in the chat for you to various places where you can look on the web for information. And also I've written a chapter in a book called Making Impressions that has 61 pages of explanatory material, including a step-by-step how to do Pochoir from the beginning, and with lots of other information, plus an interview with Natalie and Christine. So I'm going to turn my computer now to put you onto my cutting plate, and I'm going to show you how to cut. Now, is that a good view, Eric? You'll have to tell me whether or not you can see.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Good.
And so I'm going to start with what you do. Step one. So this is how you would decide that you're going to copy this. Let me do it like this. How do you copy this work of art? So this is just the upper left-hand corner of La Prose. And so you can see that it has X number of colors. I think there are, I can't remember, 18, there are 18, 21 plates. I can't remember. Anyway, so now I would take a tracing paper. So here's my tracing paper. And I would put it on top of this. And again, I don't know if you'll be able to see this very clearly, but I will have tracings of the yellow. So there's the yellow and there's the yellow. So the way that I would do that, this is how I did it with the Yale facsimile. I would take a pencil like this, which is a mechanical pencil, but it's a Staedtler, with a very, very fine point that you can use this little device to make it very pointy. And I would tape these two together, the original with the tracing paper, and I will have made some kind of a registration system. So here's my registration system that I will start with. So I have 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines. I'll get a little bit closer so you can see that I have registration. And I would, on my, this happens to be a piece of paper that I have registration lines already on. So I would register to my lines, and I would do the same thing with my tracing paper. I will take my tracing paper and I would draw the same registration lines on my tracing paper, so that now when after I've done my tracing, I put that away, and now I will take my metal plate. This is aluminum plate. This is an offset printing plate. This side is the side that gets exposed to light through a negative or film positive, I guess. And then, so it's done for offset printing. And the reason that I have this aluminum plate is that Atelier Coloris had to change, and all of them had to change because they couldn't get zinc anymore. And copper is very expensive these days. So they changed to aluminum, and that's how I learned from them. So now I put little pieces of paper on my aluminum plate with the same markings for the registration. So I would put the plate with the registration marks on it. Can you see that?
Mhm.
So now everybody's registered. That's super important. That's different from the way that I learned. I'll explain when I get to the other plates the way I learned. Okay, so now I have aligned all of my lines so that they're all perfect. I'm using removable tape. Can you see what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just taping these together. So basically what I'm going to do is cut these two things out. Then I'm going to roll them. I don't know if you can see over here, but I have a piece of marble.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure that you have a nice French wine bottle that you fill with 10 pounds of lead shot. And that becomes your roller because we're going to flatten out these things. Also, cook some bacon and pour off the fat. And now you have fat. And I'm going to put my knife to get a little bit of that fat on the end of my knife. So you know that if you've ever worked with machines like printing presses, if you have metal grinding against metal, that the metal will wear out. So you need something to make them slide together and not wear out. So that's what the purpose of this fat is. I'm also going to use it on the back of my plate in a few minutes. Okay, so now I'm ready to cut. I got just a little bit too much here. Oops, I've forgotten a little line here. I'm just going to make it up. Excuse me. So you saw a little tiny bit of this in the video, but you didn't see much. So you cut it, you start here. Can you see?
Yes.
If I get it closer here, can you see better?
We can see it.
Okay, here we go. So I'm plunging into this piece of neoprene rubber that's underneath here. I can't use, turning my plate around, I can't use the regular rubber that you use from the regular art stores because it's too hard. Can you see that the tip of my knife is plunging into, can you see the back side of it? Can you see my little tip? Which you cannot do with your regular mat. So this is rubber, about 1/4 of an inch thick, and it is 60 durometer. That means the amount of softness. And so the reason I'm showing you this is just to show you how long it takes to make one plate. You've got to get your original, do your tracing, do all of your registration marks. And La Prose takes 94 different plates. There are 128 different actions. Can you see my knife kind of going back and forth? Now I'm coming to a bunch of little tiny roundnesses, so I have to take smaller cuts. But I always want the left-hand side of my knife to be on the material side that's left. And sometimes I take out my knife when I have to do a really sharp turn, but otherwise it's always in the rubber. So you can see here, if my hand isn't in the way, that I'm making like a right turn. So I actually turn my plate, come around.
I think someone needs to switch off their camera, their microphone. Kitty, we do have a question which you might be explaining later. It's how do you keep the hinge from shifting between prints?
I do that. So with the original technique, I'll just finish this one and I'll tell you the original registration technique doesn't use these lines. Because I'm a printer, I'm used to registering with lines.
Yes.
And so At Atelier Colory, I was first taught to cut holes actually in the plates that would be aligned with a previous pochoir. So the first pochoir doesn't have those, so you align the very first pochoir plate to the image upper left-hand corner of the page, and then the next plate that you cut will have three extra holes that will align with that particular one that you've just cut. And I'll show you that when I have 4 plates to do a demonstration with, if we have time. So doing this for 8 hours a day, oftentimes, again, there's one person at the atelier who will just be cutting plates. Therefore, the pocheur would be handed a plate, 150 sheets or however many sheets of paper, a jar with all of the color in it, and we'll go to it and will not have a hinge. They will simply hold the plate in their left hand and hover over here. I've got a whole bunch of little like that. So I kind of have to go back and forth, try to make them a little bit rounded at the end. This one needs a little rounding there. There. Okay, so if it just pops out, you did a good job. Okay, so there's your hole. I'm not going to take time to do the other hole. I'm just going to take this apart now, since that's all you needed to see. And I'll put the plate now on my metal, and you see my nice plate. So I roll. And I roll because it was all wiggly and bumpy a minute ago. And I do that a number of times, different directions, until, let's pretend it's perfect.
Yeah.
I can put something behind it so that you can see that it's perfectly flat now.
Yes.
Okay.
Kitty, Thomas
Yes.
is asking, is there a good reason to not use acetate as in plastic plates? It would be easier to cut. Maybe the aluminium plate allows for more printing.
Excuse me just a sec.
Sure.
Yes, celluloid was used early on and mylar is used now. And yes, you can do that, but you need to have a dry brush. Here's your brush. You still mix your colors so that it's like skim milk, very liquidy. And you simply have to, I'll demonstrate this just in a second. When you pour a little tiny bit in here and you go around like that, you have to have a towel to the right-hand side here. You dab off some of it. So if it's too wet, it goes immediately underneath the edge of the mylar or plastic. The plastic tends to pull up when you're cutting it. So of course, I started out doing pochoir with plastic. French traditional pochoir sometimes did use plastic. And when Atelier Colory could not find, I'll just show you some plates. When Atelier Colory could not find any more zinc, they used to have these big, huge machines that would roll out zinc for roofs. So it would come to neighborhoods and you'd go to the machine and buy a bunch of sheets of zinc. And it was 5/1000 of an inch thick, like this metal is 5/1000 of an inch thick. And they tried mylar for a long time and they just said it didn't work as well. And so they luckily found an offset printing place that had aluminum plates that was the right thickness, and that's what they changed to. So I still haven't been able to find zinc sheets. They gave me one example of it. I could show it to you, but that's what they used to use, was mostly zinc or copper, very expensive. Okay, so here are the plates that I'm going to actually demonstrate with. So you're going to be able to see some holes here and here and here and here. Those were holes that when you put it on the original image, like that, you'd be able to align it with that hole there and that hole there, and this over here and this over there. That's how you align it, just by hand, by looking at it. But I found that if I had light colors, like a pink, it was really hard to get it exactly aligned. So I struggled with it for about a year using their technique. And then I said, okay, I'm going to go back to my printing techniques. So I came up with changing it. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the, let's see, maybe I should show you the gouache. Okay, so here's the gouache. So it's tubes of gouache. And here's my color. And here's another brush. So for every color, you need a brush. And that's because this stains and it holds that color for forever. So I have 66 colors. I have 66 brushes. Okay, so I'll take the yellow one over there. I think I'll take maybe 2 plates to see how much time we have to do anything. Okay, we're going to move over to my other place here. I'm going to get the fat. I'm going to get my mixing brush, this brush, a sample. Oh, and I have to tell you about the sample pages. Okay, so I'm going to move that over there in just 1 second, but I'm going to show you a couple of things. So in my research to reproduce this, first of all, let me just quickly show you the 4 plates that if I have a chance, I'm going to show you the different ways that they were cut and the size of them for the project, and that they would have multiple, and also to fess up that I didn't recut the plate. In some cases, I actually taped on some little pieces to modify it. So those are the plates I'll put over there. But before that, I just want to show you this. How do you interpret these things? So the first thing that you have to do is come up with your color charts. So each chart that you mix, remember I had those ones next to the originals. I just did a final color and gave it a recipe. And so every one of my 66 colors has one of these little color charts. And then I do a little test on a piece of paper to make sure that that's the right color. And then here, I want to show you how do you determine, let's say, all of these shapes here when things are underneath each other. So for example, here is what I call Sonia's vocabulary. So I decided that I would have to make these little cards for myself so that I could remember from one group of pochoirs. So I would do groups of 30 sheets because I couldn't get all 150. Actually, I'm doing 180. I just finished the pochoir for all 180 about a week and a half ago. So yeah, I'm very, very happy about that. So now I'm binding the books. But anyway, so when I was doing groups of 30 or 50 when I first started, I couldn't remember from one group to another, maybe, which one came first. So I wrote notes to myself about which plate came first. So plate number one would be this green one. That would be that plate. And then number 2 would be this little blue hand brush stuff on the middle of it, and so on. So each of the kind of unusual things would have examples of how I would do the different plates and when I would put the hand brushing on top of it. Or what about this one where I couldn't put yellow on top of green because when I swirled on it, it would make it, it would mix and make a new color, yellow, green. And so, so I have all of these cards and these kinds of cards and things also go into my deluxe copy. Okay, so now we're going to go over with my fat and this over here. And let's see if I can quickly, Gary, could you grab this?
Position.
Yeah.
better ask them if they can see the screen.
Yep, we can, Gary. Yep, we can see that clearly.
Okay, I'm
Thank
just
you
going
for
to
your-
get the cord on the other side so I don't kill myself or kill my husband. Just put something on top of it so that if I stumble on the weight. Okay, so you can see this? Yes. Okay, so the
Yes.
first thing that you start with is the master tracing. So here is the master tracing. Remember, I showed you just the two little shapes. So here's my yellow shape right here. Can you see that? Or should I get closer?
Yes.
Let me get this. There. Okay, so here's the 4, and here's the other 4 right there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I left my plates over here. Okay, so, oops. Okay, so here's my plate. Here are my registration lines. This is a protective, so I won't get my original. This is, you know, is worth $1 million because if I lost that, then I couldn't do this project. So now I go to my registration lines and I get this in registration. You'll also see the original. Sorry, the original little holes that I abandoned later and changed to this registration system. And what's absolutely delightful is when you look at the originals, you'll see little tan marks on the upper 2 panels where the Pochoirs couldn't get the registration right. So they had to draw in by hand with painted little lines. There. The registration. So I thought, okay, I'm glad to know that. Okay, so this is now perfect registration. Whoops, no, it's got to go down here. Got to go that line. Get over there. So this is real important to get this perfect. So now the question was by someone earlier, what about hinging? This is how I do the hinging.
Mm-hmm.
So now I can just flip this over. I don't need to hold it in my hand and hover around to get this aligned with those 3 holes. I can just say it's always going to go in there as long as my piece of paper is going to go in there correctly. So here's my piece of paper. It has no Pochoir on it. It's got all of the printed text. Can you see the text at all?
Yes.
Okay, so that's all been printed. So that's what I had done in San Francisco because my printing press is too small by 1 inch all the way around. So this is this big piece of paper. This has 4 colors on it. This was printed by Richard Siebert. We had to do the color separations and so on. So after this is done, then, and you'll see that he printed registration marks for me here. However, they couldn't be printed to the end, so I had to hand draw all of the registration marks to the corners. And you'll see that I've done just the right-hand side. Is that angle correct? Can you see?
Yep, we can see.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, so now you can see the right-hand side has been done. You saw a few of those things in the video. And now, here's a completely done one, like this. With all the registration marks, I register it like that. And I'd flip my thing around. So I get all of these stuck down with my Post-it label tape. And you flip it over and now you'll see that it aligns with the yellows. Can you see the yellows?
Yes.
You'll also see, if I can point to it, that there are colors underneath here.
Mm-hmm.
However, those colors came later. So usually you start with the lighter colors and then go to darker colors.
Mm-hmm.
So this darker color, green, would have been done later. And this yellow was put on by hand brushing because I couldn't brush it with my brush.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the 4 stages. And now I'll get a blank piece of paper. And let me just show you that when I actually bind the book, I have to cut off the edges. I cut off the top, so these are already cut off. And then I'll have 4 pages and I'll glue them overlapping right here. So now I have one big long scroll, and then I fold it in half and fold it up in the accordion fold. But for the regular copy, I pre-fold it. Okay, so here I have my tools. So I have my brush and my colors, and I have my fat, and I'll show you how I need my fat. Here's my liquid. So I squirted out some gouache and squirted in some water. And then I take my mixing brush and I make sure that the gouache hasn't fallen down to the bottom so that it's all well stirred up, depending on how long it's been since the last time I used this. When I run out, I have to make some more, so I use my color charts. Okay, so let's pretend that that's all perfect. And now I'll take a bigger brush, and so that I can put a plop of color into the dish that I need. So here's the dish that I'm going to use, and I'm going to put a little bit of color on it. I would normally do this on the table, but I'm pulling this up so that you can see it. So now I'm priming my brush, getting it ready. Sometimes I'll wait 5 minutes, but with yellow or any of the light colors, I can almost use it right away. Just don't want to be too dry or too wet, and you want to have the same consistently throughout. So I'll do a little test. Here's a piece of paper where I tested the actual color first. I'll just put it on here and see if it's ready to go. It's a little bit dry, and I did that real quickly. So I'm going to put another drop in there. And so now I've put another drop in there, big drop, and swirl it around, and I should be ready to go. And so every time that I do a print, I put a new drop of liquid in there, and I have to decide if it's a little tiny drop, medium drop, or a big drop.
Mm-hmm.
And now here's my practice paper. So I normally tape that down too. And we'll see if the brush is just the way I want it. Can you get me the blue? No, I can use this. Okay, let's see if this is going to work. So I always do in a counterclockwise movement. You'll notice that my wrist slightly goes up and down like this. It's not locked. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or 1, 2, oh, it's too dry. So it's not ready for prime time yet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You see how you go around it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's my print. So if I get little baubles coming out on the back side of this, I need some scratch paper, which I thought I put over here. I thought I had everything. Excuse me while I go run and get scratch paper. So here's some scratch paper,
Mm-hmm.
which I put on this side there, because otherwise it's going to get all over my left-hand side here. So I just tape that down. And if this were a dark blue, where's my Q-tip? Hiding.
There it is.
Can you get rid of that? Trying to do this with one hand. Okay, so here's my Q-tip. Here's my fat that I used before. I just get a little fat on the Q-tip, like that. And I'll take another piece of scratch paper. This is really important with the darker colors. You can see my correction here where I added a little curve here instead of driving this all over again, cutting it all over again. So I'm just smearing a little bit of this bacon fat, a little bit around everything. And then you have a dedicated fat brush, which is a ruined Pochoir brush. You see kind of the hole in the middle of it. So I swirl it around like this so that it's a very thin layer. So with the lighter colors, I hardly need to put this on because the color isn't going to slip under. Somehow yellow is so wonderful it doesn't do that. Can you kind of see the little mess I've made there with the fat? Okay. So the question always is, why doesn't that fat get onto the paper? Because you don't put a very much amount on it. You swirl it around, it becomes just a little thin layer. So because oil and water don't mix, that means that when I swirl around here, that very liquidy, you know, that's very liquidy stuff. When my wet brush, my brush is pretty wet. You know, when I swirl around, it would otherwise go underneath there just from capillary action. But because oil and water don't mix, this is water, that's oil on the other side. Question always, can I use anything other than an animal fat? And the answer is probably try Crisco or something like that. You just need something that's oil and water. I wouldn't use machine oil probably. Okay, so that gives me my practice. And so when I'm ready to do my real page, I've just set up somewhere in here some real paper. Okay, here's my practice sheet of paper, and I've already drawn the registration marks on there. So it's super important that all of your registration marks meet because this doesn't have a collotype print to help you. So the collotype print is really great when you've already got some kind of print. Let's get this on. When you've already got some kind of printed image here, it's so much easier to align the plate. And I would say most of the early Pochoirs had that first base layer of printed image so that you could print stuff that you couldn't otherwise do with Pochoir. So here I've got some new color in here. So I'm going to go around again. I'm going to try going a little bit wider. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, oops, too dry. Go back to get some. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Now I see that it's a little bit darker over here in the middle. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll go over it like that. But Atelier Coloris said, never go over the Pochoir. However, I have found that sometimes it's useful. If you go over it, it gets a little bit darker. But if you don't make it even, especially with the darker colors. I was going to show you some blue and so on. Okay, so the yellow is easy to do because you have no problems. And again, to reiterate that these were the original registration holes that you would cut and cover with tape so that you could still see through them. At Atelier Coloris, we actually folded them back, and I found that they were too bulky, so I changed things like that. Okay, let's see.
Kitty, just to let you know, we've kind of reached the end point of the time that we had allocated for the session.
That's fine.
Unfortunately, I mean, it's fascinating. And for me, I would, you know, happily sit here for much longer. But as it is 7 p.m. here, I'm aware that some of our guests attendees may need to go off and have their dinner and so on, but I'm very loath to interrupt when it's you're in full flow here, but I feel a certain duty to our audience here, just to
Sure. No, I understand completely. I just, I could do this for forever, and I forgot to set my alarm. I meant to set my alarm. For going on, and you didn't get as much of the demonstration maybe as I had hoped, but you got some of it. So
it was fantastic. I can see that people are putting comments in the chat. I think we've covered the most of the sort of technical questions.
And you put the links and the link to the Making Impressions book and the link. There's a wonderful new website with resources for Pochoir. How you can see old examples of Pochoir and so on.
Yes,
I've put them up yet in the chat, so they'd be in the chat, everybody.
Yeah, I've put some links. I may still add more. I mean, that's the thing. And people are asking, where can the recording of this be viewed? James, I think James could confirm that the recording can be viewed in the chat of this session. I think so. James hopefully can confirm that.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I think what I'd like to do is to first of all download it once it's completed, and then I would put it onto our YouTube channel, the CBC YouTube channel, and then obviously as a matter of courtesy, I would ask Kitty and Gary and Eric just to approve of the recording, okay? In case there's some editing that needs to be done, I'm very happy to do that. And then once you've given your approval, Kitty, then we can put it on the YouTube and make it public. So hoping the next sort of week or so we can do that.
Great, wonderful, that's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to put my camera on, because that way I feel Kitty, I want you to see me when I do this. I just want to thank you so warmly for a fantastic talk and demonstration. I also feel we could happily keep on listening for for a long time, watching the level of precision and the painstaking nature of the it's such a labor intensive process. You can understand why this is a very rare practice nowadays, in a world where speed is of the essence and immediacy, but seeing the level of technical precision and expertise, absolutely fascinating. I mean, for me as a scholar of Blaise Cendrars, and having been fascinated by the prose for so many years, but never really understanding how the thing was made, this has been just so illuminating, and I'm sure all the others who've had the chance to see you in action agree. So Christine is asking, do you do other classes on Zoom?
I have done, yes. I did one through MCBA, and they probably didn't record it because it was very long, but like over four days or something. But yes, I have done. Yes, it's crazy to do it on Zoom. You can see what you can't see and what you can see. And then I can't go and hold somebody's hand and say, you hold the brush like this instead of like that. Don't lock your wrist, and etc. But I have done it, and I've done it in London too, not on Zoom. So I've gone around to places. I didn't really want to do it until I had my exhibits going around so that people could see the examples.
Sure. Christine wants to know if there's anything upcoming.
I'm trying to finish my project. I have 50 more books to bind out of 180. It's been five years. I'm in my 6th year of trying to finish this project. So that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, it's a labor of love, and that came across so clearly. It's the depth of your investment in this, of your personal engagement with this whole project, absolutely extraordinary. So thank you so much, Kitty. And James, sorry.
Can I just add something? I mean, I have to say, I enjoyed it so much, Kitty. It was an absolute pleasure and privilege to see you in action live in your studio. I mean, we never had this before in the CVC, and it's going to be, it's going to set a precedent, I hope, because it's absolutely more than fascinating. I just want to say also a special thank you for all the effort you put into converting to Teams for this performance, because I know it's been time consuming, it's been difficult, and to Eric too, but it's really paid off. In fact, there was a bit of jerkiness sometimes, but overall it was very very clear and straightforward. So it worked, and I just want to thank you for persevering with Teams. It means a lot. Thank you.
Yes. Always overcome with technology. Yes, we can do this. Overcome.
And look, the odd glitch is totally pardonable, considering the time, the distance, the space separating us. So it's kind of miraculous. So once again, our sincere thanks. If folks have got questions that they would like to add, I mean, you can do that in the chat even once this session ends. So or I could pass questions on to Kitty. I'm sure you would be happy to address them.
Sure.
Okay, well, look, I think we should draw the session to a close there. Thank you once again, Kitty, and I know that you and I will be in dialogue again, and it would be lovely to have you back. Maybe you could do a show and tell once the whole thing is done. That would be exciting.
Yes, we'll have a big party. I'll have a big party in many cities.
Great. Well, thank you once again. There's Ruth, our head of the department and data expert.
Oh, yay.
I think we could have many an interesting conversation. So we'll maybe...
Ilias next.
Oh, yeah.
Kitty, your life goals for me watching you tonight. It's been just wonderfully soothing. Thank you so much.
Soothing, wonderful.
At the end of a very non-creative day. It was just lovely. And thank you for everybody for organising. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you all. And have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Kitty, again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.